Welcome back to the Sampanviking on China channel. Today I'm going to be looking at something a little bit controversial. I'm going to be discussing what I'm describing as the Skripals, Novichok, Orbis and Douma. And I don't deny this is what many people will call a foray into conspiracy theory territory, insofar that it has a narrative which is a million miles from the official narrative sold in the West. But I would say to those is that this is about two things that I've really been discussing in the past on this channel. One is the way in which information put out by the media in the West is compartmentalized so heavily it is almost impossible for anyone at a casual glance to make any connection between one compartment and another. And the second is how complex geopolitical plans can, once they are derailed, can go disastrously wrong. And I think this is a story that contains powerful elements of both. And on top of that, it relates to what was a major geopolitical play by the United States, and I would say was in this story was a last-ditch effort to try and save a badly failing major geopolitical play by the United States, helped and abetted by the English state, albeit by very, very covert means. I'm not going to make a mystery out of this. I'm going to tell you exactly what I think this story is really all about. And what I do believe is that in early 2018, the war in Syria to get rid of Assad and to turn Syria into another client state was going disastrously wrong. This was a key piece in the US plan to move into Central Asia. As I described in the previous video, another soft underbelly proves to be a tough old gut, where a major geopolitical play intended to roll up all the states of the Middle East and Central Asia and then to destabilize and dismantle Russia and China was set into motion, but then went disastrously wrong. But this is to say that this is a high stakes story. This is a matter of considerable importance to the establishment in the US and its followers like the UK. And under those circumstances, anything is going to be possible. I put nothing past those powers to do anything to make it come to pass. So the story, I think, is pretty much this. The war in Syria was going very, very badly wrong. The Russians were primarily responsible for that. They came in and saved Assad. The attempt to divert away from Syria in the Ukraine had gone disastrously wrong, with the Russians simply taking control of the Crimea and large parts of eastern Ukraine. They were desperate, the West was desperate to really blacken Putin's name beyond anything they'd already done. And to also save the Syrian war by giving a valid reason for intervention in their own right. And I believe the story went like this. A plan was hatched in order to have a chemical attack in Syria that would have been laced with a nerve gas with a very Russian name, and for which the Russian state and Putin individually would be personally blamed. And this, of course, was to do with Novichok, the well-known nerve agent developed by the Soviets back in the 70s, but actually well known to all Western intelligence services for a very, very long time. The plan, I think, was this. Using covert methods, a sample of Novichok was going to be smuggled out of Pordentown, which is just a few miles outside of Salisbury. It was, for some reason, to be handled by Mr. Sergei, Mr. Skripal, who maybe simply, in fact, have another Russian connection. He was going to be set up with a fall guy for this part as well. It was then to be passed through an organization called Orbis, which was connected with the people that were originally in MI6 when he defected, and Orbis itself being a very anti-Russian organization, a bit like Bellingcat in many ways, and then find its way to the opposition in Syria so it could be deployed in the full eye of conveniently placed international media, so a major outrage would have been committed and casus belli for Western intervention where others had failed. That is the story in a nutshell of what I think was happened. A black op from beginning to end, in order to really put the downers on Russia and on Putin in particular. But something went very seriously wrong. And I suspect that in this instance, the main thing that went wrong was the fact that, as you can tell by a casual glance, is that Mr. Skripal is a very heavy drinker. He has a nose so red Rudolph would be jealous. And that does rather suggest he is a drunkard of the first order. Not surprising for somebody of his generation from Russia who finds himself isolated in a very foreign and not particularly friendly and welcoming land. So, what happens? Okay, somebody in Porton Downs duly produces the beside goods, and we know it would have come from Porton Down. The fact that Porton Down were able to identify the substance later on simply knows that they already had a sample of it, because when mass spectrometry depends on being able to compare it to a known sample. So they obviously would have had a sample there. So good chance that it came from Porton Down. Incidentally, there were two poisoning incidents in Salisbury. One in Salisbury itself, one close to Avebury, and guess what? Both are pretty much equidistant from Porton Down. Didn't get much reported. Surprising, considering all the fuss that was made about the proximity of the Wuhan wet market and the Wuhan in the bio warfare investigative biolab in Wuhan itself. Big fuss made of that. An actual chemical weapons plant in the vicinity of a chemical weapons accident in Salisbury, conveniently not omitted. Never mind, moving on. So, I believe that Mr. Skripal effectively mishandled the sample, causing himself and his daughter, who maybe by coincidence or not, was visiting at that time, and putting them both in hospital, and also poisoning a policeman who came to investigate as well. Well, the entire media went into overdrive anyway, and undoubtedly they got much of the bang for the buck. But it never sounded right, and this is an important part of this story. But I'll come back to that. What then did happen? That happened in early March of 2018, and then virtually a month later, on about the 8th of April 2018, there was the very suspicious chemical attack in Douma. Very, very close proximity to these two events. And I have no doubt that the idea was to have had a much worse attack with traces of a Russian named nerve gas, where who else but the Russians could possibly have this. And so a major black propaganda op leading to military intervention could then have followed on. In the event, we had a very strange story with the Douma attack. Douma, by the time of the attack, had already fallen. Suggests it was probably due to this attack should have taken place earlier by the militants, but their supply of the expected chemicals did not come, and therefore everything was derailed. When there was the attack with chlorine, all the media just jumped into action, all with the same story, all seemingly primed with the same facts, all primed to the same level of intensity. There was no nuance, there was no variation, all of them piled in, and we see that every time we come to a colour revolution type operation or a major play of this sort. It is a intelligence-led operation that depends on lots of people all saying the same things, cameras conveniently in place, and the endless feed of woe and anguish being broadcast into the living rooms of the West. Obviously, it went very badly wrong. First of all, it was so late, the fight was already over, and there was no Russian chemicals to go there, it was just chlorine. And everybody at the time said, no, this doesn't sound right. You had former top military officers coming onto TV in this country, top UK military officers, retired, coming onto the TV in this country and saying, I can't take this seriously. Why would they do this when the fight was already over? They'd already won. Why would they do something quite so stupid at this point simply to inflame international opinion when there was absolutely no strategic or tactical value to it whatsoever. In fact, when the precise contrary is true. And this is telling you something, because whenever retired senior officers come onto the TV and say things like that, they are speaking not only for themselves but also for their colleagues on active service, who also have deep misgivings about the kind of situation that they suspect their not particularly caring political masters are trying to steer them into. And they complain, and rightfully so. And again, this comes down to we then can go back to the actual Skripal poisoning and say, well, again, this doesn't sound right either. He was a disavowed traitor by Russia. He'd left there, but he'd been there a long time. He had nothing of any real value to give the British, if he'd ever had. And if the Russian state was going to assassinate him, why do it in this way? It must be easier just to somebody to put a bullet in his head or something. Using a weapon of mass destruction, a nerve agent, as an assassination in a hostile foreign state is a pretty serious thing to do. That's the one part of this story which is definitely true. It is a serious thing to do, and if you're going to do it, the target has to be worth it, and you are going to send your equivalent of James Bond to be the assassin. You're not going to send Kevin the trainee. And it seems an amateurish affair if this is the case. It's supposed to be this totally deadly, toxic nerve agent, and yet both the people that were touched with it, as indeed with the pantomime of Navalny earlier this year, they managed to survive. Something does not sound right there. If it was an assassination attempt, they'd be dead. And if they just wanted this washed up, third rate, drunken wreck of a former intelligence officer of no value whatsoever dead, why not just shoot him or make it look like a mugging or something else? It didn't have to be done in this way. And if it was to be done in this way, it would have expected that the Russian authorities could make sure it was done in a competent way and not an incompetent one. Well, of course, the Western media love to put out, they say, oh, it just proves that just how incompetent they are. But the evaluation of Mr. Putin's track record, him being a former head of the KGB anyway, or GRU anyway, rather suggests this is not the case. His track record in combating the West is actually pretty solid and stellar. So how he would then suddenly get this wrong does rather sound like, does make you suspect that there's something wrong with the picture here. This narrative does not add up, which is why I think it was in fact a bungle that they're just trying to make the best of. And again, this does mix in is that Skripal was brought over by MI6 agents who then left. They are now associated with this organization called Orbis Business Intelligence. They seem to be involved in some way with Syria, covertly or incovertly. They certainly gave a report, very anti-Russian report, to Parliament about a year ago, and they talked about Syria in it as well, as part of Putin's misdeeds. They are very, very clearly part of the Get Putin attack set, and as such, an operation like this would have been a major operation for them and something they would have wanted to put forward. It went wrong. And as a result, they had to cover it up pretty quickly. The intended chemical attack in Douma went ahead probably late, with everybody confused about what they're doing. It looked strange, it looked funny, and a lot of the narrative that was put out initially was clearly intended for a different kind of attack. They were talking about traces of nerve agent where there were none, so they were expecting to see it. Nobody told them that the record had been changed, and again, at the end, we even had senior retired military officers coming out and saying there's something very, very funny about this. In other words, telling the political masters, drop it, it's gone wrong, don't try to drag us into a war on account of this, it's not going to work. That is, in a nutshell, the story. I hope I've made it as concise as I can. It is really to illustrate just if you look at events and string them together, you get an idea of the kind of things that do go on, and they certainly do. It's easy to to decry somebody as a conspiracy theorist, but these intelligence agencies, they get vast fortunes to play with each year. What do they do with it? Well, this is the kind of play. We know where they're active. We know what they're doing. We know that the stakes are very, very high. And when the stakes are very, very high, you'd be quite shocked, I think, to see what the powers that be here are prepared to do to make the play win. Simple as that. So now, of course, there is the one last thing, isn't there, on this story, the two Russian agents. And I know that Bellingcat have done a major expose. Bellingcat I regard more as a pantomime organisation than a realistic one. And whilst I cannot say 100% that nothing that Bellingcat says is true, I would need a huge amount of independent corroborative evidence to check the time. If they told me the time of day, I'd still check my watch. I do not trust that organisation one little bit. So, but coming back to the point that this relates, and that is the two Russian agents that were in Salisbury at that time. What were they doing there? Surely they were there to apply the killer nerve agent to the Skripals door handle, as the official narrative goes. Well, I think there's a much simpler explanation for that, and that is that the daughter of a sworn traitor of the nation had travelled to a hostile country to meet with her traitor father. And I don't think it's too much of a stretch to postulate that the Russian authorities would be quite interested to know why, and to dispatch some agents to follow her and to find out exactly what she did, what she went, how much time she spent with her father, etc., etc. And I'm sure this is pretty standard procedure for intelligence agencies everywhere, and the rest of it just sounds like a bad Hollywood movie. And when something sounds like a bad Hollywood movie, then it usually means it's written by somebody who is used to watching bad Hollywood movies, which means an American, which means that it's ultimately a Western story and has no basis or fundamental connection with reality. Well, there we are. I hope it makes sense what I'm trying to say. If you've enjoyed this video, please like. If you would like other people to see this video, please share. If you don't subscribe to the channel, please do. By doing so, you will get notifications of new videos and you will help this channel to grow, and it is free to do. Likewise, ring the bell and you will certainly get those notifications. If you would like to leave an opinion or ask a question about anything I've discussed, please leave a comment and I will reply where appropriate. Thank you very much. I hope you will join me very soon for the next video.